The rain was coming down in sheets the night I received the call. As a longtime Airbnb host, I was used to odd hours and occasional complaints, but something about this one unsettled me. The young couple who had booked my property claimed the water wasn't working. Their voices over the phone sounded calm, almost too calm for people inconvenienced in the middle of a storm. Still, I felt a sense of duty to check it out. After all, my reputation hinged on keeping my guests happy. I grabbed my raincoat and headed to the property. It was only a 15-minute drive from my house, but the journey felt longer. The winding road, slick with rain, glistened under the weak glow of my headlights. When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed something odd. 2 cars parked out front. For a couple on a one-night stay, that was unusual. As I approached the door, my knock echoed louder than I expected. No answer. I tried the doorbell. Still nothing. I called their phone, but it went straight to voicemail. A chill ran through me, though I told myself they might have gone out and forgotten to update me. Using my spare key, I let myself in. The house was eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Their bags were in the living room, but there was no sign of them. The complaint about the water echoed in my mind, so I headed to the basement where the main valve was located. The descent down the creaky wooden stairs was unnerving. The air was heavy, damp, and carried a faint metallic tang. I found the valve almost immediately. It had been shut off manually. A strange knot tightened in my stomach. Why would anyone turn it off? As I turned the valve back on, I heard it. The sound of the basement door opening upstairs. My heart stopped. At first, I thought it might be the couple, but then came the unmistakable creak of footsteps. Not one set, several. They were coming down the stairs. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The footsteps grew louder until 3 men appeared, their faces half hidden by shadows. One of them held a crowbar, another had a knife tucked into his belt, and the third, the tallest, gripped a gun loosely at his side. None of them spoke. They just stared at me, their eyes dark and unreadable. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to speak. I was just fixing the water, I said, holding up my hands. My voice trembled despite my effort to sound calm. It's all sorted now. I'll get out of your way. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was suffocating. I was sure they were going to kill me right there in the damp basement. But then the man with the gun nodded toward the stairs. Go, he said, his voice low and cold. I didn't need to be told twice. My legs finally obeyed, and I walked past them, feeling their eyes bore into my back. The climb up the stairs felt endless. I expected to feel a hand grab me at any second, or worse, hear the crack of a gunshot. But nothing happened. I stepped outside into the rain, got into my car, and drove away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep control of the wheel. When I got home, I called the police. It wasn't until the officers arrived at the property that the full extent of the situation became clear. The men had ransacked the place, stealing everything of value: electronics, jewelry, even kitchen appliances. The couple who had supposedly booked the stay. Their identity had been stolen, and the reservation was made using a stolen credit card. The officers told me I was lucky to be alive. They believed the men had lured me there, likely intending to rob me, or worse. But what haunted me most was the question I couldn't answer. Why did they let me go? Was it because I played along, or was it something else? I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The memory of their faces and the weight of their silence stayed with me. Even now, years later, I find myself wondering what might have happened if I'd hesitated, or if I'd asked the wrong question. Hosting strangers in my home has always been an act of trust. But that night, trust almost cost me my life. Liam had been looking forward to this trip for months. After weeks of deadlines and endless meetings, he finally booked himself a quiet getaway in the countryside. The Airbnb listing had glowing reviews, cozy, private, and nestled deep in a serene forest. Just what he needed to unwind. The drive was long, but the promise of solitude kept him going. By the time he arrived, twilight had settled over the cabin. It was charming, with rustic wooden beams and large windows that looked out onto a sea of trees. He followed the host's instructions to retrieve the key from a lockbox by the door and stepped inside. The interior was just as advertised, warm and inviting with a lived-in feel. Exhausted from the journey, Liam flopped onto the couch, letting the comfort of the soft cushions envelop him. He locked the front door, double-checked it, and drifted into a deep sleep. Somewhere in the night, Liam was startled awake. A cold draft brushed over his skin, making him shiver. Groggy, he sat up and blinked into the darkness. The cabin was eerily silent, save for the faint rustle of trees outside. That's when he noticed the front door. It was wide open. His heart dropped. He was certain he had locked it. Rising slowly, he scanned the room, his mind racing with possibilities. Had he been too tired to secure it properly? Or worse, had someone broken in? Gripping a kitchen knife he found on the counter, he crept through the house, flipping on lights as he went. Every room was empty. There was no sign of anyone. Still, a sense of unease prickled at the back of his neck. He quickly texted the host. "Hi, the front door was open when I woke up. I'm sure I locked it earlier. Is there anyone who might have access?" No response. The message remained unread. Liam paced the living room, weighing his options. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe he'd imagined locking the door. Yet the thought didn't sit right. After checking the locks again, he decided to try and sleep in the bedroom upstairs. It felt safer somehow, with a door he could lock between him and the unknown. Hours passed, and he was finally beginning to relax when he heard it. A soft, deliberate creak just outside the bedroom door. His body went rigid. It wasn't the sound of the house settling. These were footsteps. Slow, measured, as if whoever was on the other side didn't want to be heard. Liam's throat tightened and his breathing grew shallow. He didn't dare move, straining to hear more. The footsteps paused, then resumed, inching closer to the door. His mind raced. Could it be the host? They were the only person who had the door code. But why wouldn't they respond to his text? Why come in the middle of the night without warning? He reached for his phone with trembling hands, dialing 911. The faint click of the call connecting must have been audible because the footsteps abruptly stopped. A chill ran through him as he imagined whoever it was standing right outside, listening. Moments later, he heard rapid movement, footsteps retreating down the stairs and the faint thud of the front door slamming shut. When the police arrived, Liam felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. He recounted everything to the officers, showing them the unlocked front door. They searched the area but found no sign of an intruder. The host finally arrived, an elderly man who looked genuinely shaken by the news. "I didn't come here," the man said, his voice wavering. "I live 2 hours away. No one else should have access to this place." Liam stared at him, trying to process the implications. If it wasn't the host, then who had the door code? His mind flashed to the open door, the footsteps, the presence just beyond the bedroom. The thought that a stranger, a complete unknown, had entered the house made his stomach churn. The police couldn't provide many answers, but they suggested Liam find another place to stay. He packed his things in record time, the fear clinging to him like a second skin. The ride back to the city felt endless, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few minutes. The cozy cabin that had seemed like a dream retreat was now a place he'd never forget. For all the wrong reasons. For weeks, Liam replayed the events in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sound of those footsteps haunting his nights. He never stayed in another Airbnb again. The experience left him with a hard truth. No matter how peaceful a place seems, the unknown always lurks just beyond the door. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend for Lila, staying at an Airbnb nestled in a quiet, wooded area just outside of town. She had planned this getaway to escape the stress of city life, to enjoy some solitude and recharge. The small house was cozy, with warm lighting and a view of the dense forest that surrounded it. After a long day of hiking, she settled onto the couch with a blanket and a glass of wine, letting the soft hum of the TV fill the silence. At around 11 p.m., as she was starting to drift off, the doorbell rang. The sudden sound jolted her awake. She froze, staring toward the front door. It was late. Too late for anyone to be visiting. Her first thought was that it might be the owner of the property, but that didn't make sense. They had assured her everything was set for her stay. Cautiously, Lila approached the door, peering through the peephole. Two men stood outside. One of them was tall and broad, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, while the other was thinner with a nervous expression. "Who is it?" Lila called out, her voice shaking slightly. "We're supposed to be staying here," the taller man said, his tone firm. "We booked this place. You need to let us in." Lila's stomach churned. Something about their presence didn't feel right. "I think there's been a mistake," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm renting this place right now. You should contact the owner." The men exchanged a glance, and the tall one leaned closer to the door. "Look, we're tired, and it's late. Just open up. We don't want any trouble." Her unease deepened. "I can't do that," she said firmly, backing away from the door. "Please contact the owner." There was a long silence. Then, without a word, the men turned and walked out of sight. Lila's pulse pounded in her ears as she locked the deadbolt and double-checked the windows. She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was probably a misunderstanding. But when she glanced out the window, her breath caught. 5 figures stood in the driveway, their faces hidden behind masks. They were motionless, staring toward the house. Her heart raced as she realized there might be more lurking in the shadows. Panic surged through her. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated threat. Lila grabbed her phone and darted into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. She dialed 911, whispering to the operator about the masked individuals outside and the men at the door earlier. The dispatcher assured her that police were on their way, but Lila couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Suddenly, she heard the front door shatter. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house, followed by heavy footsteps. They were inside. Lila covered her mouth, holding her breath as the intruders began tearing through the house. Drawers were yanked open, cabinets slammed shut, and furniture overturned. She could hear them talking in hushed tones, their words muffled but tense. Every second felt like an eternity as Lila crouched in the corner of the bathroom, clutching her phone. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to stay silent. She thought about her family, her friends, and whether she would ever see them again. The sound of footsteps drew closer, pausing just outside the bathroom door. She bit down on her knuckles, praying they wouldn't come in. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. The group continued their rampage through the house, but for some reason, they didn't open the bathroom door. Lila didn't dare move. Finally, after what must have been 20 agonizing minutes, the house fell silent. She could hear the faint roar of car engines as the gang sped away into the night. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed outside the window. The police had arrived. Lila unlocked the bathroom door and stumbled out, shaking uncontrollably. The officers quickly assessed the scene, confirming that the gang had looted the house and her car, taking her wallet, phone charger, and other belongings. They assured her she was lucky to have avoided direct confrontation. One officer explained that this kind of break-in was becoming common. Organized gangs targeted remote rentals, knowing they were often occupied by unsuspecting travelers with valuables. Lila left the Airbnb the next morning, her nerves shattered. The The thought of staying in another unfamiliar house made her stomach turn. That night, as she lay awake in her own bed, the terror of that evening replayed in her mind. The masks, the footsteps, the sound of the door breaking, all of it haunted her. She didn't know if she would ever feel safe traveling alone again.